That shows also the depravity of humanity.
New details revealed in a crime that shocked the nation when a 4-year-old girl was found murdered and her 6-year-old sister kidnapped and traumatized. Investigators now say the man responsible for the crimes left the 6-year-old alive to act as his sex slave.
Unfortunately, on Lexapro, sober, no drugs in my system, I did. I had no reason for what I did.
Prosecutors now say the man confessed to all this after his arrest, telling investigators he stabbed the little girl's mother 30 times before kidnapping both her daughters and taking them more than 100 miles from home.
This is absolutely not unheard of, which is absolutely grotesque.
Now, both the suspect and his accused accomplice could face the death penalty.
You hope for the death penalty?
For what I did, lethal injection is the easiest thing for me.
This is absolutely a death penalty case.
That's former CIA officer and FBI agent Tracy Walder, who we reached out to when researching this case.
It's a very complicated case because you have so many different charges going on.
The case began on June 13th when an Amber Alert was issued for 4-year-old Callie Brunett and her 6-year-old sister. Both girls were missing from their Larenger, Louisiana home, but that's not all that was amiss. Their mother, 35-year-old Callie Brunett, was found in the home's bedroom, brutally murdered. Court documents now reveal Brunett was stabbed approximately 30 times. And now we're learning some more details that the mother had been stabbed at least 30 times, which to me sounds like a crime of passion. To you, does that sound like it was overkill?
Yes, I think, anytime you're seeing something like that, that's not, I guess, what we would consider efficient, right, in terms of killing someone, although that's an awful way to put it. Typically, when you see something like that, it is someone who knows the victim, is close to the victim, and has some kind of a personal rage or personal issue with the victim.
As first responders in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana, began the investigation into Callie's murder, the search for her daughter sprung into action. If we're starting at the very top, when her body was found in Louisiana, what is the first thing that investigators would be doing, knowing, okay, we have 2 young girls who are gone? How does all of that work?
Right. So the first thing that they're going to do is obviously put out missing children reports or Amber Alerts, whatever the state has in terms of how they deal publicly with getting the word out that minors are missing. Then what I think they will do is look at her last communications in terms of where she was and the direction of whomever may have taken them would be going. I think whatever main roads are near the house, they're obviously going to subpoena those cameras to see if they can find a car matching matching the license plate of whomever was at the scene. And so I think that's where they would probably start first. But the first thing they're going to do is obviously get the word out. And depending on how close they are to another state when a child goes missing, they may also alert the next state over.
Early on, investigators noted that Callie's vehicle was missing along with her 2 daughters. According to court docs, plate readers tracked the vehicle from Larenger to Jackson, and they also caught surveillance video from a McDonald's. Officials say both young girls can be seen in this video, and so can Daniel Callihan. Investigators quickly determined that Callihan knew both girls because he used to date their mother. Investigators used this security camera video and Crime Stoppers tips to track Callihan to a home in Jackson, Mississippi. It was more than 100 miles from the original crime scene where Callie Brunett was murdered. And it turned out that these kids were taken across state lines into Mississippi. So already we have 2 states, and then the FBI can get involved. So what would that look like, the difference between local and state law enforcement and the involvement of FBI?
My guess is they would not hand this case in its entirety over to the FBI. I just don't necessarily see that. Now, if it involves human trafficking, then yes, FBI would take jurisdiction over that because that would cross multiple state lines. Right now, the FBI would be helping them process forensic and digital data because there is probably so much, it can become really burdensome for local law enforcement to process all of that really, really quickly. They may have the resources to do it. It may just take a long time. And the FBI has a lot of resources to do that. They also assist in interagency communication between the states and helping with that as well.
According to court documents, when Callihan and the two young girls arrived in Mississippi, the minor victims were crying and did not want to stay with Callihan. Eventually, Callihan decided to kill minor victim 1, that's 4-year-old Callie Brunett. Court docs also state Callihan decided to keep minor victim 2 alive as a sex slave. In the confession, the suspect said, "I killed the 4-year-old and then I kept the 6-year-old to be a sex slave," which immediately stands out to me as completely grotesque. But additionally, this girl is 6 years old. She hasn't even gone through puberty yet. So is this something that we normally see when it comes to human trafficking, someone so young being taken?
I hate to use the word normal, right? Because none of this behavior is normal, in my point of view. I think first of all, a human trafficking case that I worked at the FBI, there were 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 7-year-olds. Unfortunately, it is a fetish that some people within the pornography industry have, and those children are trafficked. There was another instance here at my daughter's school with her teacher who was convicted of child pornography, and the kids in those videos were 7. And so I don't want to say it's common, but this is absolutely not unheard of, which is absolutely grotesque.
You mentioned cases you had worked in the past of younger kids who'd been involved, including 4 years old. So that kind of leads into my next question, that the 6-year-old was kept as the so-called sex slave, but then the 4-year-old was killed. So why wouldn't he just keep her alive too?
I don't know. Obviously, I don't know that I want to get into his mind, right? I don't know that that's a space anyone wants to live in. My guess is that it may have been too much for him to deal with, 2 children. Again, I don't know. She may have been too combative. It may not. Again, I don't know, but 2 may have been too much for him, and he had to eliminate 1. Again, I'm not certain.
Once on the scene, investigators found 4-year-old Erin's body. Her 6-year-old sister was rescued from a pit on the same property.
Upon a search of the area by Jackson police officers, they located a deceased child in the woods. We suspect that to be one of the children that he had in his possession, that he had illegally taken away from Tangible Hope Parish in Louisiana. One of the child, the 6-year-old, my understanding, has been taken to the hospital to receive treatment, but my understanding the 4-year-old is deceased in the woods.
Court documents state that while the United States Marshals Task Force was searching the area, 2 civilians approached them and said they had recently heard 2 children screaming from the woods. Walger says this fact stood out to her right away.
There were other people interviewed in this story, in the news articles and in police reports and all of that, that heard children that sounded like they were in distress, in the home, in the woods, children that were crying, children that seemed unhappy. And why did the bystanders not do something? And I think that's where my brain went. And again, I am not blaming these bystanders, for the deaths of the mother and the child. But at the same time, this is what happens when you do nothing.
But that is something that jumped out to me too, especially going through the court documents. Once investigators were already there, they're like, oh, by the way, we heard some kids screaming. Right. So if that does happen, let's hope it never happens to anyone, but if it does and you hear something like that, what should you be doing?
So in my opinion, if you hear children, or really anyone, quite frankly, that is in distress, obviously, particularly children, I think, you are well within your rights to call law enforcement and report that tip anonymously. Law enforcement is great about keeping people anonymous, particularly in cases where violence is involved or retaliation is involved. And so why none of those folks, picked up the phone and called 911 and put a tip in anonymously, that's very frustrating to me.
Do you think it's possible that had anyone who overheard anything, whether it was in Louisiana or if it was in Jackson, Mississippi, that had they reported something, any of the lives could have been saved?
I hate to jump to that swooping of a conclusion because, again, that's a heavy burden to put on these bystanders. They did not kill these individuals, right? They did not murder them. But I do think that inaction has consequences. And I think in this case, that inaction on behalf of bystanders ultimately did lead to the deaths.
In addition to 4-year-old Erin's body, investigators made another grim discovery on the scene. One of the things we also heard initially after news reports were made that the suspect had been arrested, investigators on the scene said, "We found cages." They didn't really go into description of what exactly the cages were used for. I'm just connecting the dots here that potentially one or both of the girls could have been stored in the cages. What do you think their use could have been?
I mean, again, I don't know for sure, but that would obviously be my most educated guess is that they would need to be detained, for some period of time while they are being used in the capacity in that grotesque capacity. So that is my best guess as to what they were used for. But again, I don't know for certain.
Callihan was eventually charged with first-degree rape, sexual battery, criminal sexual assault, sexual battery, and fondling of a child. But Walter says there could be more charges on the way. Is it possible that he had uploaded pictures or videos of her to some sort of online server? Could more international or national crimes be involved? How does that look?
100%. I think that there may unfortunately be pictures and videos out there. Again, this is just my hypothesis, and that's why the FBI would be involved at that point. Them and Department of Homeland Security really do focus on human trafficking, sex trafficking, and children. And so I do think that that is probably what they are looking at. And also, they're probably looking at the people that are consuming those pictures, quite frankly, and those videos as well, because they need to also be held accountable.
So more charges could be ahead for Callihan or anyone potentially involved in these child pornography allegations. But there's also another suspect who's already been charged. Another puzzling aspect of this case is that there are two suspects rather than just one. So Daniel Callihan seems like the ringleader in all of this, performed the first murder, or so he confessed to, took the girls across state lines. But then once he's in Mississippi, there's another suspect, Victoria Cox, who apparently helped in the murder of this 4-year-old girl and potentially some of the sexual assault. That part is puzzling to me that a woman gets involved in this. It's just not something I usually see. What do you make of that?
Yes, I mean, it is unusual. And women, obviously, I mean, I'm a mother myself. We tend to have more of that, I guess, motherly, nurturing capacity. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that women aren't involved in this. In that case that I had worked at the FBI, it was a husband and wife duo that were working together, which I know is horrific to think about, but that's what they were doing. So I don't want to say it's completely unheard of. It just tends to not be as common. But a lot of times, particularly when we see human trafficking and sex trafficking, women are brought in to help make victims feel more comfortable. If you even look at Jeffrey Epstein, for example, Ghislaine Maxwell was there to try to make these girls feel comfortable, and rope them in. And so I have to wonder if that's why she was initially brought in.
32-year-old Victoria Cox now faces charges of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. According to court documents, Cox did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously kill a human being, Erin Nicole Brunett, a 4-year-old female child, while engaged in the commission of the crime of kidnapping. Also, because of all of the crimes that they have, the multiple states that are involved here, death penalty is now potentially on the table for both of the suspects. They could face that if they end up being convicted, and that's the route that prosecutors want to take. So what do you think all of that would look like? I'm sure that the investigation would have to be pretty airtight for prosecutors to move forward with that.
My guess is the death penalty is going to come into play in the state charges. Typically in the federal courts, because that's where the trafficking and all of that, in my opinion, is going to be looked at. They'll tend to not pursue the death penalty. They can, they just tend to not. So that will then be left up to the states. This is absolutely a death penalty case. It might be used as sort of a plea bargaining chip to avoid trial, life in prison, or death penalty. You pick which one, sort of a situation. But from a federal standpoint, their charges would be human trafficking, sex trafficking, those kinds of things. And in the state, my guess is they're looking at separate murder charges.
Both Cox and Callihan have since spoken to police, giving specifics about these alleged crimes. After investigators were able to track him down, take him into custody, it seemed like a pretty quick turn that he confessed and gave descriptions about what had happened. In your experience, how does that work when the suspect is very forthcoming with the information? Can we trust that what they're saying is true?
Yeah, typically, yes. Especially, it's interesting in child pornography cases and the few that I am familiar with, they actually confess pretty quickly. It seems to be they either confess or commit suicide or attempt suicide. That tends to be one or the other, just because the evidence is so copious against them. Obviously, any information in a confession has to be vetted. You have to vet that information, and that's probably what they're doing right now. Look, do I think his information is 100% accurate and he's probably shirking some of the responsibility? I do. But it's a good starting off point, quite frankly, for investigators.
As part of the interview, Callihan confessed to both Callie and Aaron Brunett's murders and the plans to keep the 6-year-old girl as a sex slave. He also told investigators he'd been planning this for a while. Also, according to the court documents, he had told investigators he had been thinking about killing their mother for quite some time. So to me, that sounds premeditated, even if it was in the moment, but he'd been kind of thinking it through. Does that sound right?
I would think that that statement could be admissible, in terms of a first degree premeditated murder charge. Again, I'm not certain what they will ultimately decide. He's going to, in my opinion, spend the rest of his life, given everything, in jail. So they may not go with first degree murder based on just that statement alone. But if they can also prove, though, that he sent texts about it, he talked about it, he went and purchased weapons ahead of time in preparation for it, then yes, they'd have a very solid case.
Not only did Callihan speak with investigators, he also spoke to the media.
Unfortunately, on Lexapro, sober, no drugs in my system, I did.
Why? Why did you kill the 3-year-old girl?
I have no reason for what I did. All I know is I want to say I was sober and only on Lexapro and off Lexapro, and I'm also diagnosed borderline with multiple personality disorder, and I have not got to talk to a lawyer, and I'm on suicide watch, but I'm not suicidal. But I think it was the side effects of the Lexapro.
Did you kill her mom?
His mom.
Aaron's mom.
I'm at Rankin County Jail if y'all would like an interview.
Do you regret what you did?
Completely.
You regret what you did?
I would kill me, and I have told them everything that I did, and I have agreed to not fight it, speedy trial, and whatever it is.
You hope for the death penalty?
For what I did, lethal injection is the easiest thing for me.
Are you pretending to be crazy?
Oh, I'm not pretending to be crazy. Look me up in Region 8, borderline multiple personality disorder. You better look it up.
So you have no...
Crazy. I'm certified. I was only out of nut house 2 weeks now.
Walder says all this will be used against Callihan, and investigators will try to get even more information too. And we know that they talked to him right away after he was arrested. But is it possible that they're going back a couple more times, following up with details, new information, and trying to learn more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very common. Obviously, you get that, I guess, initial download, right, of information immediately, right, when the arrest takes place. And then as you have more questions or need more things cleared up as you're reviewing that initial statement and obviously tracking that initial statement and making sure it's correct, then yes, you absolutely go back.
But there's another key witness in the case whose involvement is vital. So we know that investigators have spoken to both of them, Callihan and Cox, but another key witness in all of this is that 6-year-old survivor. That leads in kind of murky water because she's obviously been through some pretty big trauma, and additionally, she's only 6 years old. So investigators, I'm assuming, are going to want to talk to her, but what sort of tact would they use in order to get the information from her without re-victimizing her?
Oh, they're going to have to talk to her with a child advocate. There's no question they have to. I do not know what the status is of her biological father, but obviously he may be brought in depending on what that relationship is like, or the next of kin, which could be grandparents as well. They're going to have to consent to all of that. Quite frankly, I actually think between Cox and Callihan and other information, they may have enough to throw the book at them without having to re-victimize the 6-year-old and more focus on her mental and physical healing as a result of this.
If the cases do go to trial, both Daniel Callihan and Victoria Cox will be tried in both Louisiana and Tennessee. On top of that, Callihan could also face a federal trial for his kidnapping charges. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.